Hi guys, I am going to talk to you about conflict, and the way I'm going to talk to you about it is I'm going to kind of break it up into two different ways. One is to talk about what are the different dynamics that go into conflict, and the other is to really talk about what are the basics or what are the fundamentals for working through conflict. So the other day I was watching my kids play basketball, and it was one of our first basketball practices that we've had in a long time. And before we went, we talked about what are the fundamentals, what are the things that you really need to know to help you, because you can't just go out and play a game, or you can't just go to the 3-point line and expect to make it the first time. And it's really important in basketball and really in life that you understand what the basics are. What are the fundamentals? We got to break it up and get to the simplicity of things in order to really help you move through things. So the beginning, what are all the things that really go into a fight? And I really have about 5 things that I think go into a fight. The first one is understanding that there are 2 kinds of conflict. According to Dr. John Gottman, he talks about perpetual and solvable problems. Perpetual problems are really things that come up throughout the history of your relationship, and we see them occurring over and over again. And those make up about 69% of conflict, and solvable problems make up 31%. And really, what's the difference? The biggest difference is, with solvable problems, they're usually very quick, they're not as painful, and perpetual problems are things that, again, like I said, they come up throughout the history. So you could be talking about it, 1 year, and then it's going to come back, the next year, or you notice that it comes up every time you fight. And behind a perpetual issue is usually a belief or value system that you're not willing to compromise on, or it's a dream that you're holding on to, and you really, you're not going to compromise on that. And so the first part is understanding, what kind of conflict are we in? Is this perpetual, solvable problem? The second part that really goes into a conflict is when we start to feel like the loss of a friendship in a relationship, or we're not really friends anymore. And again, when we don't really feel friendly with the other person, we don't want to compromise at all. We want to fight for our position. So it's important to understand that if you're starting to lose friendship, you've really got to do things to start to connect to your partner again. Believe it or not, what happens outside of the conflict, so what are the ways that you're nurturing your relationship every day, actually really matters when you are in conflict. If you have positivity in your relationship, if there's friendship, if there's a lot of emotional intimacy, if there's mutual understanding, mutual respect, it actually helps minimize conflict or the intensity. Doesn't mean you're not going to have conflict, it just helps when conflict arises. And then the other important thing to remember is when conflict arises, if you don't feel heard, if you don't feel understood, then you're not going to take advice from, or you're not going to really want to listen to what the other person has to say. You're just going to stand in your position. The third piece is the ratio of positive to negative, and again, this is from Dr. Gottman. If there's a lot of positivity in the relationship, meaning kindness, compassion, empathy, affection, appreciation, admiration, then when conflict arises, then typically it's going to help work through it, and you're more willing to work through it. If we're in a lot of negativity, and Dr. Gottman calls that negative sentiment override, that means when you go to talk about one thing, it's like this, collapsing effect where you're just in this big fight, and you're either very volatile or you're not talking at all. And so it's important, again, like I said, with step number 2, you really want to make sure what you're doing outside of the conflict. How are you nurturing your relationship? And I've talked about that before in other videos. Then step 4 is the 4 horsemen. Dr. Gottman talks about 4 ways that we communicate in a relationship that could be detrimental. And what are those 4 horsemen? It is contempt, criticism, defensiveness, and stonewalling. And I just did a video on an explanation of all the 4 horsemen, so please feel free to go watch that. But really, the four horsemen, the four ways that we negatively communicate. If we are criticizing, then we're going to get caught up in a cycle of, attack, blame, criticize, defend. And when we're in that, we don't want to get out. We just want to defend, defend, defend. So the four horsemen, if we are criticizing, we're usually defending. If we're very contemptuous, then we don't even want to talk to one another. We just want to put the other person down. If we're stonewalling is when we become so flooded with emotions that we quickly shut down and go into fight or flight. And if we are stonewalling, then we're either in a very intense battle or we're not talking to one another at all. And so really the last thing is conflict avoidant. If we are constantly avoiding conflict, it comes back 4 or 5 times bigger than what it was in the beginning. And it's a loss of friendship because you're just not talking. You get to a stage where not only do you not talk about your conflict, you just don't talk to each other. And then indifference sets in. And once indifference sets in, you really, you get to this place of you don't care, contempt. So when contempt and indifference are in a relationship, it's really a sign that your relationship is in trouble. And oftentimes, if you don't go seek help, it can lead to divorce or separation. So those are all the, anatomy of a fight or things that go into a fight. So now I want to talk to you about the fundamentals. What happens when you're in conflict? And some basic things, I'm going to go through about 5 things that really can help you out of conflict. So the first one is how do you accept influence? And what's that even mean? Again, this is another term from Dr. Gottman, and he talks a lot about how we can accept influence from our partners. Forgive our partner the benefit of the doubt. If we, take some time and really kind of want to understand our partner's perspective, then we really take time to say, hey, I'm interested in what you're having to say, or I'm interested in, what part of this, is a problem for you, and how can I understand it better? And so accepting influence is also honoring your friendship. So it's really important to accept influence from one another. There's also the importance of repair. And what is repair? Repair is, trying to stay in it with using more like I statements, I need, I feel, I would appreciate, without attacking or blaming or criticizing the other person. So if you feel attacked, you could say something like, I'm feeling really attacked, or hey, I really blew that. Can we start over? So accountability, saying things that really help you repair are important. Or let's say, guys, you get in a fight and you both kind of stormed off. Go back, once you've cooled off and cooled down, go back and repair it. Gottman says 94% of the time, how we start a conversation is how it's going to go. So if we start it with a, I feel, I need, with something like that, then we're usually going to avoid any increase or escalation in anger or conflict. So remember that too. Also, the importance of empathy and validation. And you can empathize and validate your partner's perspective even if you don't agree. You're not always going to agree, and that's okay. So take some time to really validate or be empathetic to what your partner's saying, because what you're really communicating to them is not just empathy or validation, but you're communicating to them, like, I am here in this moment with you, I am present. And presence, especially in conflict, is so important because you're saying, I'm here, I'm willing to sit in this with you and work through it. So that is super important. Step 3 is how you manage stress. The difference between external and internal stress. Internal stress is really when it's relationship stress, and external is everything outside of the relationship. So if you're managing your stress well, or if you've just had a horrible day at work, then you want to come home, you want to talk to your partner about it, or maybe you need some extra time at the gym, or just some time to kind of meditate because it's been a really bad day. you need to be able to communicate that to your partner, that you need some time to cool off or to kind of leave work at work. But if you don't let your partner know what's going on with you, and you come home and you're irritable, and all of a sudden, your partner didn't do the dishes and you're fighting about the dishes, when really you're fighting about you've had a really rough day and you haven't communicated that with them. So talking to each other about how you manage your stress, or when you're just under a significant amount of stress, is really important. Stress can also be like if a family member is sick, or financially, a big bill like the tax bill is coming up, and you've got to negotiate how you talk about it, and finances is something that you really disagree with or fight about, then that's kind of like this looming stress out there. It's important that you talk about those things, especially at a time when it's not right in the moment, but being able to talk about stress is important with one another. Step 4 is really understanding flooding, like when you feel flooded, or what your trigger points are. Once you understand what triggers you or what kind of escalates things for you, it's important to let your partner know that. And also plan for a break. So if you say to your partner, hey, I'm feeling really flooded, I need a timeout, you guys have a plan in place where you're saying, if I'm saying I need a break, then I'm going to go 15, 20, 30 minutes and cool off and cool down, and I'm going to come back in those 20, 30 minutes. So you make a commitment to come back to the partner. When a lot of times couples are like, if I say let's take a break, then we're not ever going to come back and talk about it. And that's not what I'm suggesting. What I'm suggesting is at a time when you're not in conflict, you talk to one another about, if I say I need a break, or you create a code word of bananas, then if one of you says bananas, then it means that you're taking a break for 30 minutes to cool off and cool down, and then you're going to come back. The commitment is that you're willing to come back to each other to talk through or to try and work through the conflict. And so what do you do in that break? The best thing to do in that break is to physiologically self-soothe. So deep belly breathing. If you've ever taken any yoga classes or some meditation, deep belly breathing is where you get your heart rate to come back down. And then once you get your heart rate to come back down, it's important to really think about, okay, what's 1 or 2 things I really want my partner to hear that's super important to me about this issue? And then that's what you bring back to your partner. So that's important. And then step 5 is to know the antidotes of the 4 horsemen, as I've discussed in the other video, but I'll quickly go through them. The antidote to criticism is a gentle startup. I feel about this is what I need, or this is what I would appreciate. The antidote to defensiveness is accepting responsibility for your part in it. The antidote to contempt is 2. 1 is creating a culture of appreciation. So finding things that you appreciate about your spouse or partner every day and telling them. And then the other is don't make assumptions, state how you feel, as opposed to thinking you already know what your partner feels or how they're going to react or respond. So that's super important. And then the antidote to stonewalling is taking a break. You've got to physiologically self-soothe. So, taking some time to cool off and then think about what's a positive need. What do I need my partner to hear about this specific issue? And those are really important. Okay, step 6 is your subjective reality. And what does that even mean? In a conflict, for the most part, what you're fighting about is how you see it. So if I ask you guys to kind of describe what you see as you watch this video, everybody would describe something differently. And who's right? We all are, because we're describing how we see it. And so in conflict, we need to kind of go in with the understanding that how my partner sees it and how I see it are 2 different ways. And this is why you want to express empathy and validation, because you're saying, I want to hear how you see it. If you jump into a conflict just trying to persuade or convince your partner that your way is the right way, guess what? It's only going to increase the conflict and the fight and the argument. And a lot of times, if we get to that place of trying to convince the other that I'm right, no, I'm right, then we're in a place of we're reacting, so we're impulsively saying things that are hurtful or harmful as opposed to responding. So, subjective reality, understanding that how you see the conflict is very different. Different is okay. Trying to work through it is to say to the other, how did you see it? And this is how I saw it. And then based on that, what are we actually working towards? So, common goal. And so those are some important steps that really help you understand like some of the basics or fundamentals of how to work through conflict. So again, accepting influence, finding ways to repair, using your I statements, how you manage stress on the day-to-day is super important, and how to talk to your partner about it. Understanding times that you feel flooded and what your triggers are, so what really escalates things for you. Talk about those at a time that you're not in the midst of conflict. The antidotes to the 4 horsemen, and then your subjective reality, you know, how you see it. So if a conflict arises, if you go into it with knowing and understanding these basic skills, you're going to be able to work through it in a different way. Even if working through it means you're going to take time to say, hey, we're going to agree to disagree, or we're going to agree that we both see this differently. So I think these are some really important fundamentals, and I want you to comment below and let me know if you have any questions or what's a good tool that you have learned that helps you work through conflict. Some upcoming videos are really going to be about how to work through the difference between a perpetual and solvable problem and compromise. Don't forget to subscribe to my page so you can get weekly videos all about relationships. Have a great day.